My name is Dylan. I'm in rabbinical school. I'm a male to female transsexual. I am Asperger's. I'm dyslexic, blind. I'm in a wheelchair. I have dysarthria, so I use AAC, and have non-epileptic seizures and epilepsy. I'm a musician and filmmaker, and I have a BA in history and an MBA in music business.
My name is Margot. I have cerebral palsy. I studied biology at Penn State Harrisburg, and I'm an independent filmmaker.
Margot will now read an article on Down syndrome in Iceland. The article is Iceland isn't eradicating Down syndrome, it is killing every person who has it, published by Live Action from 2017.
Iceland isn't eradicating Down syndrome, it is killing every person who has it, by Catherine Livingston, PhD. A recent CBS News episode of CBSN on Assignment has gathered some disturbing headlines this week, with an episode entitled "The Country Where Down Syndrome is Disappearing." The story reports on the nation of Iceland and the almost 100% abortion rate for preborn babies diagnosed with Down syndrome. The CBS story took on a tragically ironic tone. Since prenatal screening tests were introduced in Iceland in the early 2000s, the vast majority of women, close to 100%, who received a positive test for Down syndrome terminated their pregnancy. Using an ultrasound, blood test, and the mother's age, the test, called the combination test, determines whether the fetus will have a chromosomal abnormality, the most common of which results in Down syndrome. Children born with this genetic disorder have distinctive facial features and a range of developmental issues. Many people born with Down syndrome can live full, healthy lives with an average lifespan of around 60 years. Iceland, with a population of 330,000, sees only about 2 children a year born with Down syndrome, CBS reports, noting that in the United States, around 6,000 babies are born annually with Down syndrome. While some women choose not to receive genetic testing, since an Icelandic law requires women to be informed of the availability of testing and a majority of women do test, it is widespread practice. So is aborting the child diagnosed with Down syndrome. In fact, one mother even admits to CBS News that she indeed aborted partly from the pressure she felt because it seemed so many mothers were doing it. CBS reports that 4 out of 5 mothers who receive a prenatal diagnosis of Down syndrome choose to abort their baby. For expectant mother Brakodif Esendadekar, who chose to have the test, knowing that most women did so, helped steer her decision. It was not pressure, but they told me that most women did it, she said. It did affect me maybe a little bit. The story explains that sometimes the reason 2 children per year with Down syndrome are born is because sometimes after their parents received inaccurate test results. And one hospital official who works in prenatal testing at the facility where approximately 70% of Icelandic babies are born adds, babies with Down syndrome are still being born in Iceland. Some of them were low risk in our screening tests, so we didn't find them in our screening, making the birth of a baby with Down syndrome sound like a mistake due to bad testing is only one of the many disturbing attitudes in the nation. The story reports how one mother who received incorrect test results launched herself into advocating for individuals with Down syndrome. When Toradis Idikar was pregnant with her third child at the age of 40. She took the screening test. The results showed her chances of having a child with Down syndrome were very slim, odds of about 1 in 1,600. However, the screening test is only 85% accurate. That year, 2009, 3 babies were born with Down syndrome in Iceland, including Idikar's daughter Augusta, who is now 7. Since the birth of her daughter, Idikar has become an activist for the rights of people with Down syndrome. Another consideration of Iceland's genetic testing is that if it's only 85% accurate, how many children with Down syndrome diagnoses don't actually have developmental issues? Iceland is certainly aborting some children it would deem worthy of living, but of course, every child should have a right to live, no matter what issues might exist. In a society that values life, this is not a difficult concept, but in Iceland, the right to life is only a reality for some, and that's why the backlash against the nation has been so vitriolic. When CBS News posted in its initial tweet about the story, the replies were fast and furious. Everybody loves Raymond Starr, an outspoken pro-lifer. Patricia Heaton agrees with many of these tweets and blasted the nation's practice on her Twitter account. Patricia Heaton, Iceland isn't actually eliminating Down syndrome. They're just killing everybody that has it. Big difference. Hashtag Down syndrome, hashtag abortion. Heaton's Twitter feed is now filled with replies sent to her by parents and loved ones of those who have Down syndrome. Many are thinking Many are thanking her for speaking out. Most of the tweets sent to her by others are pictures of obviously happy and thriving people with Down syndrome, something that no doubt has become rare in Iceland. The CBS News story quotes geneticist Kari Stephenson, who founded a genetics company that studies almost all of Iceland's genomes. Stephenson said, "My understanding is that we actually have basically eradicated almost Down syndrome from our society, that there is hardly ever a child with Down syndrome in Iceland anymore," but also admits, "I don't think there's anything wrong with aspiring to have healthy children, but how far should we go in seeking those goals is a fairly complicated decision." However, at the hospital where most Icelandic babies are born, one of the people counseling women about their prenatal diagnoses says she tells women who are wrestling with feeling guilty about their abortion decision, "This is your life. You have a right to choose how your life will look like." We don't look at abortion as murder. We look at it as a thing that we ended. We ended a possible life that might have had a huge complication, preventing suffering for the child and the family. And I think that is more right than seeing it as murder. That's so black and white. Life isn't black and white, life is gray. This attitude is the most disturbing of all. If a human heart's beating stops, that person is considered dead. There is nothing gray about that. Life is life and death is death. Parents of children with Down syndrome often comment about the joy their children have brought them and many they meet. Despite what Iceland leaders may believe, there are many who are happy to adopt children with Down syndrome and special needs. So if a woman doesn't feel she can raise her child, she should be offered adoption as an option. Iceland officials may not look at abortion as murder, but that doesn't make it any less so. Abortion takes a human life. Iceland most certainly has not eradicated Down syndrome. It is simply killing every person who has it. What is Down syndrome?
Down syndrome is a developmental disability similar to autism, cerebral palsy, spina bifida, and Williams syndrome. A person with Down syndrome can exhibit an outgoing personality, the opposite of autism, to the point they hug every person they meet. What is a chromosome?
A chromosome is a way the body packages DNA to make it easier for a cell to copy itself to make a new cell. Each chromosome has a tiny bit of genetic information about how a person looks and behaves inside it. Humans normally have 46 chromosomes total. In biology, scientists number each chromosome to make it easier to study. People with Down syndrome have an extra copy of chromosome 21, giving them 47 chromosomes in total. There is also a type of Down syndrome called mosaic Down syndrome, where only some cells have the extra chromosome 21, but not all of them. A similar disability to Down syndrome is Williams syndrome, but instead of being caused by an extra genetic information, Williams syndrome is caused by a missing piece of chromosome 7, which is a piece of a chromosome that is missing, and it is called a deletion.
What is amniocentesis?
Amniocentesis is a genetic test done in pregnancy to diagnose disability before birth. The test involves putting a needle into the pregnant woman's stomach, into her uterus, and pulling out a small sample of amniotic fluid. Amniotic fluid is a protective fluid that surrounds the baby and contains some of the baby's DNA. So, a genetic test is done on the DNA to look for chromosome issues in the baby. The problem is, these tests are very risky and the genetic results can lead to a false positive or false negative result. Risks to the pregnant woman include infection, bleeding, and miscarriage. The baby can also end up in a situation where they don't have enough amniotic fluid in the womb, causing lung failure when they are born. This is because the amniotic fluid is essential for lung, muscle, and kidney development in a baby, and without it, the baby will not grow.
What is abortion?
Then I say an abortion is a killing of a preborn baby.
What are the different types of abortion?
The type of abortion used depends on the size and age of the preborn baby. In a first trimester abortion, a woman takes 2 pills, which together are called RU486, misprophone. These pills destroy the hormones in the mother's body that allow her to stay pregnant, and without the hormones, the baby literally starves to death from a lack of blood flow. The change in blood flow to the uterus can cause a woman to bleed to death, and there have been many women that have died from RU486. RU486 is luckily reversible. If a woman has a doctor inject her with a large dose of progesterone, a hormone that is created and injected in the same way that trans hormones and insulin drugs are. In later term abortions, the baby is large, so the abortionist has to put surgical instruments inside the uterus and tear the baby's limbs off and crush the baby's head, or inject the baby's heart with a medication called digoxin to induce a heart attack, and then the baby is removed after it has died. The late-term abortion procedures are the ones used to abort babies with Down syndrome simply because by the time the genetic testing is done, the baby is already developed into the second and third trimester. The later in pregnancy the abortion happens, the more likely the pregnant mother will have deadly complications due to the baby's size. It is possible for a baby to survive an abortion and be born alive. Many abortion surviving babies are born with limb differences, lung problems, and cerebral palsy. One baby with CP to survive an abortion became a singer named Gianna Jensen.
For all the mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers who have lost someone to abortion, it can be hard to heal from this, so I say that the people of Israel stand with you in your grief, and may their memory be for a blessing.
He shall bear love you, new I shall have you, the source of strength to pass the ones before us. Now let's find a marriage. Make a life a blessing. Let us say, Ishabera, continue, now come, now Sending no feeling near who I the same blessing. Spirit, let us say, ye.
To help us understand the practical implications of aborting a child with Down syndrome, I want to invite a certain pink experiment to make an announcement. Angel, do you have anything to say?
I'm 8 weeks pregnant.
Top of my top, I knew, I knew. This way, I knew, I knew, this way. I knew, I knew, this way. Cover, mazel tov, mazel tov, every tov, every tov, mazel tov, every tov, every tov, mazel tov, every tov, I knew.
Angel, did you get your first ultrasound yet? Not yet, but I'm so excited. I'm getting it next week.
Congrats. I'm happy for you. Is this baby a burden to you in any way, or does this baby make you feel like a slave to your own body?
For your information, Miss Piggy, take your dick where the sun don't shine because I'm privileged by God to give birth to another alien life.
I understand you take pride in giving birth, but I want you to consider you will never be a CEO and will always be subordinate to Stitch. Being that this is the case, consider getting an abortion for your own liberty.
If you think I need an abortion to realize my full autonomy, we clearly have never met before, and I want to be a mommy because I know Stitch will always take care of me.
Okay, let's sweeten the pot. I will give you $3,000 for an abortion that stems from the Dylan Rothbein Liberty Coalition charity fund.
For your information, my family, my Ohana, is not a pity party. How dare you bribe me into such a barbaric act? I'm sorry, Angel. I hope you accept my apology on behalf of Dylan, who lacks empathy. I accept your apology, but I know Dylan is a misogynist pig who knows more about me because she's a dude who knows more about being a woman than I do, yet wouldn't be man enough to deal with the pain of childbirth.
Being that you are keeping the baby, how do you feel about a baby with Down syndrome?
I would give my baby with Down syndrome love that is out of this world.
Didge, are you sure you can protect your baby with Down syndrome in an ableist world, and how would you feel if Angel got an abortion to make your life easier?
If I didn't stand up for my kid with Down syndrome, I would be abdicating my responsibility as a father, no matter the impairments of my child. As Jordan Peterson said in the video you showed me, Dylan, be the rock for other people. If Angel got an abortion, that makes me a failure of a man because if Angel gets an abortion, that makes it mean that I did not create an environment for a child to be disabled or not to thrive, which would make me a loser, and Angel should not have to marry the government because I failed to provide for my Ohana, my family.
Do you think that your kid having Down syndrome is a reflection of you and your masculinity negatively?
No. Kid with Down syndrome is not a reflection, but a gift from God. And didn't you teach me, Jim Sinclair, who said, mourn your kid in private. You are such a hypocrite. I am not a refrigerator father. Irrespective of my kid's Down syndrome, he or she is cute and fluffy like Stitch and Angel.
How does abortion on babies with Down syndrome fit into the history of eugenics and bioethics more broadly?
When we talk about the history of eugenics and bioethics, Margaret Sanger comes to mind. Abortion on babies with Down syndrome and cystic fibrosis is linked to the American eugenics movement and Hitler more broadly. There was this idea of Margaret Sanger's that the disabled, blacks, gays, the poor, and Jews were leeches on society. She invented birth control and founded Planned Parenthood in the hopes of sculpting society into a superior race, as Hitler put it. Another thing that Sanger was a champion of was forced sterilization to prevent certain groups from reproducing, and therefore the group ceased to exist.
A controversial but prominent figure within the American eugenics movement is Margaret Sanger. Next page, so I can show the picture. Margaret Sanger lived from 1879 to 1966. Now go back. She believed that blacks, gays, and the poor and the mentally and physically disabled were drains on humanity, hence should be wiped from the gene pool.
If disabled people stopped reproducing, they would cease to exist. This means that if you manipulate a bunch of Aspies, they are not their birth sex, and they take sterilizing hormones, Aspies would cease to exist. This is why the progressive left is a eugenics-based movement at its core, because metaphysically, by this logic, disabled people don't have lives worth living and their lives are a tragedy. Historically, if you think of P.T. Barnum or Autism Speaks, it is what Stella Young called inspiration porn. This means gender affirmation can be pity and the eugenics plot to make a superior race. An important concept to bear in mind with eugenics and the eugenics movement and bioethics is the idea of playing God. What this means is that when we experiment on the human genome, we don't understand what we are messing with, and as they say in Genesis, so God created man in his own image. Male and female, he created them. This means that when we pick traits we think we want, we will lose out in the end. When Hitler came up with the final solution, he created a genetic bottleneck.
Another genetic condition that also is related to a genetic bottleneck is Marfan syndrome. Marfan syndrome is a connective tissue disorder that results in a person being very tall and stretchy. They're hypermobile, so they have double jointedness, particularly in their heart, but in their joints more broadly. This is what leads to premature death in this population. A person with Marfan syndrome is my friend and mentor, CUNY Disability Studies scholar at the CUNY School of Professional Studies, wearing your Master's in Disability Studies. He died at the age of 40 due to a heart issue, most likely. May his memory be for a blessing. Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is another connective tissue disorder that results of a genetic bottleneck. This is what leads to hypermobile joints and due to a lack of collagen. An example of hypermobility is what I can do with my hands. I was diagnosed with a connective tissue disorder related to Ehlers-Danlos. If not for the genetic bottleneck, I shouldn't be able to do this.
The question that has to be asked: at what cost do we pursue genetic perfection? If we engineered a perfect specimen, we have no diversity, and what cost does this have on society? Steve Silverman wrote an article called Aspie Geek where he pointed out people in Silicon Valley. If we chose perfect, we lose neurodiversity. As Temple Grandin put it, where would we be without autistic people? If eugenics was achieved, we may temporarily weed out genetic disease. But we lose more. Like if we got rid of gay people, a lot of sexually transmitted disease would end, but we would lose people we love. If we got rid of everyone with Down syndrome, we would have less heart attacks, but we would lose people who put similes on our faces. What is the scientific ramifications of abortion, especially on those with Down syndrome?
Scientifically speaking, abortion reduces the amount of genetic diversity in a population. When a population is too genetically similar, that population and potentially the whole species can die off due to disease or major natural disaster because they have no ability to adapt or change. This lack of diversity has already caused many animals and plant species to go extinct. Scientifically, killing a baby with Down syndrome does not change the genetic biological process that leads to the third 21st chromosome. It just kills an innocent baby who has that chromosome change. Most babies with Down syndrome are carried and birthed by able-bodied mothers.
What are the comorbidness of Down syndrome?
In Down syndrome, a person receives a third copy of chromosome 21. In humans and other living creatures, there are usually 2 copies of each chromosome. This is called the diploid organism. Sometimes the creature will have 3 copies of all their chromosomes. This is called triploid. Some common fruits like bananas and other plants are naturally triploid. However, being triploid in humans is usually fatal. Down syndrome, by contrast, is where a person inherits a third copy of only the 21st chromosome while the other chromosomes remain diploid. This is called trisomy. So people with Down syndrome survive into adulthood. Having a third chromosome 21 affects the development of every part of the body. In about 50% of people with Down syndrome, the person's heart is smaller, affecting how much blood flow each body part receives in the womb. This affects how much blood flow the brain receives during embryonic and fetal development, contributing to intellectual impairment, lung problems, balance and gait problems, and eye problems. People with Down syndrome tend to pass out from low blood pressure related to autonomic nervous system issues and have blood sugar problems like diabetes and hypoglycemia, which also affects how the brain functions throughout a person's life. People with Down syndrome tend to develop neurologically to be very social. Unfortunately, soon-to-be mothers are very frightened by the health problems associated with Down syndrome and will opt for the prenatal testing to diagnose Down syndrome. If the tests for Down syndrome come back positive, the mother almost always decides to abort the baby at about a rate of 90% in the USA. Now a word from an expert on friendship to tell us how we can be friends with those with Down syndrome. Twilight Sparkle, the Princess of Friendship of Equestria.
Princess Sparkle, can you explain why a person with Down syndrome has friendship magic?
Certainly. People with Down syndrome have friendship magic because an extra chromosome does not determine how much friendship magic a person has.
What are the benefits of being friends with someone with Down syndrome? What friendship skills do people with Down syndrome bring to the table in terms of friendship prowess?
The benefits of being a friend to someone with Down syndrome is you get to be friends with someone who has a unique perspective on the world, who is very empathetic. People with Down syndrome are very good at the skills of loyalty and generosity towards others, and they bring happiness to the world, just like my friend Pinkie Pie does. Exactly.
I'll let you go now, Twilight, since I know you have a whole kingdom to preside over, Your Royal Highness.
Okay, but before I go, huff bump for Dylan, boink, 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 and huff bump for Margot, boink, boink, boink. Bye-bye, bye-bye, Dylan's fans.
To understand the moral imperative to conserve life with Down syndrome, we look no further than Adam and Eve and creation itself. In this parshat we ask, what does it mean to be made in the image and likeness of God? Every person is made in the image of God, but in the context of eugenics we ask what is the value of human life? In Exodus we learn the value of thou shalt not kill, so how can we in good conscience take a life of someone with Down syndrome? A person with Down syndrome is worthy of God's love because God did not specify ability, He made Adam and Eve based on personhood. This is true for any immutable characteristic, and it is what makes us human. God chose us at Mount Sinai because He saw us as capable as steward of God's creation, so are we not stewards of people with Down syndrome as well? Oftentimes eugenics takes the bigotry of low expectations and assume those with Down syndrome is too stupid to deserve love, or that disability is such a tragedy that disabled people should not be born. But this is not so. God only gives people the life He plans for them. Rabbi Shomer Korbach was once asked by rabbis how to start a yeshiva for hippies, and his response was, "It's not what the hippies can learn but what you can learn from the hippies." This leads me to ask you, what can you learn from people with Down syndrome? We are all human and have the potential of eating of the tree of knowledge, but one person's mistake is another's teachable moment. To infringe on a person with Down syndrome right to life in the womb is, as John Locke put it, a violation of the negative right not to be killed. It was Maimonides who said we are endowed by our Creator with unique talents, which was paraphrased as we are endowed by our Creator with unique and unalienable rights. It was the Declaration of Independence that Glenn Beck calls the mission statement of our country. And people with Down syndrome are part of the community and part of nothing about us without us. I would ask all of us to open our hearts as Abraham and Sarah opened their tent to build a more perfect union together, whether you are disabled or able-bodied, gay or straight, or neurodivergent or neurotypical. We are all unique individuals made in the image of God.
How can you do it, God? How can you take away our flesh and blood after all the life gone for you? I was there for you. How can you? I would have we catch with you. Fatherhood, fatherhood, a blessing and a curse. Fatherhood, fatherhood, a blessing and a curse. How can you take our children away from me? How can you make me pay for another man's child? The court will side with her. I was your protector. I was your provider. Fatherhood, fatherhood, a blessing and a curse. Fatherhood, fatherhood, a blessing and a curse. He would be a great man someday. I and it did go. We cut off his head. The day he becomes a man, I would have been there the day he becomes a man. I would have taught him it's okay to cry. I would have shown him it's okay to cry. You can show your feminine side. Fatherhood, a blessing and a curse. Fatherhood, a blessing and a curse. He would have made a great man son. He would have made a great man son. Yeah.